Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to another SIO Capco webinar. Today, we'll be looking to cover some items around the IBOR transition, how to be prepared for that. We will cover a little bit around the impact on COVID-19 for the IBOR transition also. Before we kick off, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping items for today's meeting. We are purposefully keeping ourselves away from the video, apart from a couple of snapshots of some of the attendees when they are introducing themselves. But the reason for that is so that we save our bandwidth and we have a good quality presentation for everyone to listen and see. We also would like to keep everyone on mute. And if you do have any questions, there is a Q&A button on the right-hand side of your screen there, the last button on the right-hand side. If you press that and you enter your question in there, we will pick that up and we will cover them towards the end of the presentation as much as we can. Okay, so let's kick off. So I am joined today by Roland Inglis, who is the head in Capco, and he's going to, the executive director is going to give him his own presentation in a minute. Also, Sarah O'Callaghan, Hannah Cameron, who came through to the SIO suggesting this presentation for today as well on this subject. And we have Murray Longton, who's going to be taking us through the slides as well. So that's enough of me. I'll pass you over to Roland, who's going to introduce himself much better. Thank you, Roland.
So welcome, everybody. Roland Inglis here. Thank you for joining us today, SIO members and valued members, clients of Capco. Thank you, Leah and Raymond, for setting this up today. I've just got my video on just now while we kick this off, but I will pop it off afterwards. So just to introduce, I head up Capco in Scotland and have built the business over the last 4.5 years here. I'd also like to introduce Sarah O'Callaghan, who is one of our principal consultants in Scotland, who leads the digital practice across Scotland and will field some of the Q&A later in this session. And Murray Longton, who is another principal consultant in our Scottish practice, who is our LIBOR SME today, who is our key presenter today, and you will hear more from him in a moment. So by means of a very brief introduction, this is the second webinar in a series that Capco are delivering in partnership with the SIO. The first, Workforce of the Future, Ways of Working Post-COVID, we delivered in June, July time, and we've had lots of focus on ops resilience since then. Today, we're talking about operational readiness in the LIBOR transition, and we already have a third one in the series planned for the 15th of October, Design Thinking in Operations. Today's attendees range really from valued Capco clients to some members of SIO who may not have worked with Capco in the past, so don't want to go into any kind of sales pitch, but just so you're aware who we are. Capco are a management consultancy, about 6,000 people globally. We only work in financial services. We have about 1,200 consultants in the UK, and about 140 of those have grown in our Scottish practice, as you can see there. As our name, the capital markets company, suggests, we initiated in capital markets, but really broadened out there across financial services. We're known for delivery in business change, technology change, rolling our sleeves up and getting things done, but specifically our practices in regulatory and mandatory, the digital and data side of things. Wealth and asset management is key for us, and everything tends to have a technology and digital flavour, and then more recently our insurance practice is establishing itself. Without further ado, moving into the LIBOR side of things, you're all probably familiar with the London Interbank offered rate. It's the reference interest rate for tens of millions of contracts worth more than 240 trillion US dollars. And it ranges from complex derivatives to residential mortgages. So LIBOR's hardwired into all manner of financial activity, risk, valuation, performance modelling, and commercial contracts. It has been called the world's most important number, but I'll leave you to decide that. But let me pass on to Murray Longton, our SME, who's going to lead us into this session today and get into a little bit more content. Thanks again.
Brilliant. Thank you, Roland. And thanks all for dialing in today. So just again, building on the housekeeping from Leah earlier, the agenda today will give a brief overview. Hopefully most of you who have dialed in are aware of this transition and what it means, but it's always good to go over those, those base principles and just understand why it is so important. Then let's talk through some of these reoccurring themes we've seen. I think as we've worked with clients and done a whole number of these webinars now, and as we continue to see this transition evolve, of course, what this transition means for the operations and the operations function, the considerations there, and then what we like to call our what to watch for and our hotspots. And these are kind of the baseline, or these are the things that are always moving, and these will always have an impact in some shape or form on how you get yourself operationally ready for this transition. We'll then finish up with some closing remarks before opening the call to Q&A. And again, just to reiterate and echo what Leah said at the beginning, we want to make these sessions as interactive as possible and, just try and give a bit more variety. And if there's anything at any time that you want to question or anything that I've said that you may even disagree with, please don't hesitate to jot it down into the Q&A box and we'll get to that in the final part of this call. That being said, we'll probably talk now for the next 30 minutes or so and give 20 to 15 minutes at the end for that actual Q&A. What we also want to do today was introduce polls into this webinar just to get a flavour of A, who's in attendance, but also B, give you an opportunity to see where your peers are at, where those challenges are going, and essentially what's happening. And I find this such an informative thing as we do this, particularly as everyone is in the same boat and everyone's got to face the same deadline come the end of 2021. So with that on our next slide, and our first poll, just to get everybody warmed up, is if you wouldn't mind telling us what type of organisation you're representing today on this webinar. You'll see on the right-hand side there is a poll button there. If you just want to click on who you are, what you're doing. And what we'll do as we go through this is I'll repeat that, or I'll say back these results to you and just give you a flavour of who's dialed in or what's been answered at every step along the way. So while that's going on in the background, it's interesting to see we've got a good mixture here between banks, asset managers, another couple of consultants on the call as well, and some other as well. So no, thank you again for all taking time today to basically come and listen to us talk about this. So with that, and starting this webinar in earnest, on our next slide here, just giving introductions. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think, as Roland said, he said the key things, but basically, why are we here and why do we care about the IBOR transition? There's been the four key themes which have been around for about the last 4 or 5 years now where this transition has gained momentum. But when we talk about the interbank offered rates and most prominently LIBOR, it has served for decades as this globally accepted benchmark for interest rates. And when we say decades, we're talking north of 40 years now. This has been ingrained into everything, as Roland said, from complex derivatives all the way through to retail loans on the other side. The benchmark pretty much started to get questioned, or the integrity and validity of it got really challenged during the global financial crisis in 2008, purely because of this lack of real transactional data. And as such, this buildup of volatility and the liquidity drying up, trust was obviously further impaired as well when we saw this collusion and manipulation. Obviously, I won't name names, but it's quite well known across those banks globally who participated in this manipulation. And as such, this transition was born. The G20 and the Financial Stability Board, or the FSB as it's better known, mandated IBOR reform back in late 2014. However, the phasing out of this really started to gain traction from probably about, I would say, mid-2017, where the FCA actually committed to a date of 3rd of January 2022, by which it would no longer compel banks to make these LIBOR submissions. Again, depending what you read and who you speak to, Roland quoted about 240 trillion, but I think we can safely say the number lies anywhere from 200 to $400 trillion worth of exposure to this LIBOR benchmark. I think as we start to progress into next year, we'll get a lot more clarity about how that looks and what that really looks like. Essentially, and what we've said here along this timeline, the real kind of drive behind this is central bankers, regulators, international authorities, industry associations, and official working groups that are really working together to try and drive this out. We come to the back end of 2022, there is a lot to do in a really short period of time, and particularly Q1 2021, we anticipate some real big movements to really make sure this can happen in a timely manner. where these big regs and transformational challenges do present unprecedented challenges for the industry and financial institutions in general, we want to kind of leave a message here or a thought today that this offers an opportunity to achieve compliance, all you participants rather, to achieve compliance, while also being innovative in optimizing product development, your operations function, and these technology choices as we move into next year. So with that, and on my next slide here, we've coined what we like to call our reoccurring themes, and you can probably say the exposures, the fallbacks, the client outreach, the legacy book migration, regulatory communication or expectations, apologies, have remained consistent over the last 3-4 years, and COVID could be replaced with any other regulation or any other kind of mandate which steers away from the BAU. But as we look back at what we've seen, particularly at the start of this year and the back end of 2019, we've seen that COVID-19 has forced the whole way of working, how we approach work, how we continue to develop against regulatory expectation while focusing all resources onto maintaining BAU at the beginning. And that's when this initial flurry of COVID happens, to where we are now, where it has kind of established a working rhythm and a pattern whereby we can see these new ways of working starting to implement themselves. I was dialed into this ISDA session a couple of weeks back, which is normally done in person in New York and London, but they made this all virtual, and that initial shock seems to have been weathered. And COVID has definitely shone the spotlight on this transition and asked a lot of questions of it, but equally at the same time, it's provided this opportunity to continue working, which I think for some is a good thing, but for others is a concern because it leaves even less time. And I think there was an expectation and belief that maybe a delay would come off the back of this. Exposure, quite simply, from a reoccurring theme, is what COVID really shone the light on was maybe the analysis and maybe the preparation had gone into the initial impact assessment and scouring of products to understand where you stood from a LIBOR point of view was not as informative or not as correct as initially thought. So as such, we're continuing to see exposure challenge programs and readiness as we start to point towards the back end of 2021. And again, I cannot see this becoming something that just disappears anytime soon, purely because of that outstanding notional amount that remains there. The fallback language will always remain a challenge, and even I think as these new products come into play, we have this hybrid state of legacy LIBOR, new RFRs, and everything in between. There's this real kind of drive and impetus to understand what this means and how this works and how you intertwine this across your organization. This presents a whole number of legal challenges and associated technology challenges that we'll go into further on in this presentation. Client outreach, while maybe not specifically a operations or risk or technology consideration, what we found and what then seems to be a reoccurring theme is the narrative from your relationship managers, your front office sales, has to be consistent with what's cascaded internally. We always talk about making sure the clients are educated and the sophistication there about what this transition means. But fundamentally, you need to make sure that narrative is echoed and reverberated internally so that you're educating your workforce to understand these processes and everything in between. The legacy book migration, the legal headache, this will continue to go on long past the benchmark ending, purely because of, again, it ties in with your exposures, your fallback challenges, what has been the bread and butter of your business for such a long period of time. How do you run this dual operating model and everything in between? And of course, the last point that's always going to be reoccurring when we talk about any big change in transformation is what the regulators are saying and doing. The real challenge we have with IBORs and the LIBOR transition in general is you've got multiple jurisdictions all trying to fight and form their own way forward through this. You've taken away that consistency and similar narrative that's existed over the past, many, many years. So as we kind of go through the rest of this presentation, and we'll come back to elaborate on these points here a lot more further down the deck, but as we start to look at the operations function and what this challenge means, or this LIBOR challenge means, it's really important to understand that at any point in the next year and 3-4 months, that any one of these themes can actually challenge and really require your program to transition, to pivot at any certain point. So with that, we will now go on to our second poll, which is COVID specific and very timely, considering we've just had some new narratives given by Bojo and co. But COVID-19 has had a profound impact on the standard order of business. Have you, as an attendee today, or on behalf of your organisation, recognise this as an opportunity to reevaluate and reprioritise your IBOR transition efforts? Yes, reevaluating and reprioritising. No, you're the stars. You've understood all along how it means. And unsure, still waiting to get a bit more confirmation from the the regulators or the jurisdiction in which you're operating. And so we'll have this voting open for about another 20 minutes or so. Sorry, 20 seconds or so, and I'll read back the results to this audience, because that's quite interesting to see as it comes in. We've still not really had anyone believe that they're it's starting to update a little bit now. Okay, so it's quite interesting actually. This is seeing the majority of attendees just focus on the reevaluation, reprioritization of their program. About a quarter of the attendees today are happy with their current planning and that they're ready to go. And yeah, just under 40% are unsure, are not fully certain about what this means as we move forward, which I think would be consistent as well. So yeah, interesting. And that's probably what I'd expect to see. I think from our own engagement with clients and the industry in general, we're seeing a mixture of COVID refocusing on what exposures may or may not have been and how that's manifesting itself in these plans towards the back end of next year. Moving on to our next slide is the actual focus on the operations function itself. And what I feel has potentially been overlooked throughout all this of the last couple of years has been a lot of focus given on how these new products come into play, how we build up liquidity, how we cascade what these products mean to your customers. But to me and to a lot of my colleagues at Capco and the industry in general, is how you get yourself operationally ready for this transition. And why this is so important is because the amount of change that needs to happen, and while the efforts to prepare for the transition from LIBOR will be significant, it just seems to get lost how important this operational readiness factor is. The considerations around the intertwining of products, how systems are going to react with each other, how financial reporting is going to work, how risk reporting is going to work, how teams react and interact with each other, how the clients digest these new products, and just the actual change in general just seems to get overlooked or not factored in. It's like, we'll worry about the products first and then worry about how the organization kind of supports itself to get there. In its simplest form, the structural differences between LIBORs and these new risk-free reference rates make operational uncertainty unavoidable. That's what we like to call like a truism. These challenges are also further exacerbated by these looming unknowns in the market conventions, market structures, legal uncertainties, and of course not to even forget the actual LIBOR end date come 3rd of January 2022. And what we've seen as a whole in terms of approach is industry breaking down their approach, breaking down their sort of LIBOR transition into two areas or into two main pieces, splitting between cash and derivatives, focusing purely on the currencies in themselves. While logistically we find this quite an efficient mechanism or a way of doing it, it does add that additional level of operational uncertainty and all these considerations around basis risk, accounting issues, your hedging strategies and how you account for that, and how they can maybe just get phased out, need to be updated. And if this isn't monitored and regulated in the right kind of way, you could find yourself in a very precarious situation with X amount of time to go next year. So as such, we have these 5 key focus areas of operational readiness, which will help you, I wouldn't say weather the storm indefinitely, but get you on the best platform and the best plateau to address the LIBOR challenges as they come, particularly into next year. We're going to see this real ramp up. Part number 1 on this slide here, the new product review. I'd probably say this is one that everyone's familiar with. This was driven off the initial impact assessment. Where's our exposures? Where do we have most of our exposure? Which products need to get prioritized? Sonia is much more advanced than SOFR. It's just getting that understanding of how you phase in these new products and roll back on your existing LIBOR products. So as a whole, we would say the industry globally is pretty much ready for this. Where it starts to get a bit more complex and where the challenges start to come off the back of this is when we start considering what financial and non-financial readiness looks like. As a principle or as a basis point, industry needs to understand the viability of these benchmarks and actually how they impact that RFR transition program. This could be everything down to volume measurement of your inventory, how your contracts sit across different jurisdictions, against different tenor lengths, against different, retail agreements, etc. And what strategies you have implemented in there to ensure you're covered from, the economic aspect of this, but also the non-economic or the non-financial, as we like to call it, and how those manifest themselves across your organization. The third part, and this will come as no surprise at all, is how technically ready are you, or how technically savvy are you for this transition. Technical readiness and any kind of large-scale operational challenge or IT transformation have to be clearly defined from the base level to ensure that you have business readiness, but also that target state technology requirement management as well. Where we see a lot, and what we've seen from previous kind of big transformation programs, is this gets considered at the beginning, then doesn't really get focused on at the end when you're trying to get that square peg into a circle hole. So by developing that plan to address these tech issues, these tech deficiencies, and those operational gaps, you find yourself in a position whereby your ops function can be as responsive as possible to any sudden change or any sudden requirement from a regulator point of view, an industry point of view, or even from a front office point of view. Again, the communication strategy, point number 4, not strictly an operations requirement, but as important, because it goes into that coordination aspect and ensuring you have a constant narrative between front office, back office, everyone in between, making sure essentially your front to back is good to go. And what we've seen, and what I'd probably say if you had to ask me right now, most of industry have identified and analysed what the contracts are and updated models to reflect part of this. However, that coordinated communication of transition expectations does remain largely work in progress. So by spending that time now on your communication strategy, engagement and strategy, you'll find yourself in a position ready to go. And the last point is the production readiness and the go live is, something this big requires a lot of testing, a lot of preparation, and a lot of alignment to these Bank of England working group requirements or your ARC requirements, depending which jurisdiction you sit in. And ensuring or having an understanding as to where you sit against those milestones will best kind of prepare you or show you for where you're at. And that is essentially our cheat sheet, or our 5 key things I would say you want to focus on to make sure you're operationally ready. And also a big thing at the moment, operationally resilient as we move into next year. It looks like COVID is going to rear its ugly head again. There's still a lot of uncertainty from regulatory point of view. And in having this kind of structure and this bedrock foundation to your transition approach, you'll best position yourself to deal with these challenges as we move forward. On to our third poll now. And this is, again, will be interesting to see just off the back of what we've talked here from an ops readiness point of view. Basically, as we said, the birth rate of these new the birth of these new rates requires many market conventions, the evolution of market structures to support it. But that being said, which of the following areas are your main focus area? And again, there's only 4 here, but having spoken with our clients, this is where we see most of the energy and time being spent on getting ready, the actual transition itself. And again, I'll just give that another 15, 20 seconds to factor in. Okay, so a lot of it's focusing on the bookings models and the operational risk management, which again would be consistent with what we're seeing from industry as a whole. I think accounting and risk system updates is probably a bit too premature or a bit too early in the journey to focus on yet. But again, if anything, I would say to this audience is making sure that you're aware of what these changes will require of your organization and how you best ready yourself for that. Brilliant. Moving on to my next slide here is come back to this reassessment of these five points outside of outside of COVID, and why they're so important, and why on the previous slide, getting yourself operationally ready is so important. When we talk about exposure considerations, fallback language challenges, the client outreach strategy, legacy book migration, and regulatory expectation, or that interaction with regulators, one of the things we want to keep reiterating to our clients and industry in general is it's a very shaky assumption that this IBOR transition deadline, parenthesis, is just another deadline that can be neglected in light of COVID-19, FRTB, any of SFTR, any of these other big regs that are existing at the moment. These 5 recurring themes here along COVID are, I'd probably say, the real hotspot areas and the real kind of areas which are going to continue to throw out challenges as we move forwards. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and give me a half day or give me a full day, I'd happily go into the gory details of all of this. But when my team and I and colleagues on this call today put our heads together, we were thinking about what is it that's going to directly affect a challenge or affect a challenge and transition program, and secondary to that, or in line with that, is where the operations function has to pay the close attention and really be focused. And this is what we came up with. Of course, underlying this are a myriad of tech, resourcing challenges, SME dependencies, and of course, the environment and the market itself. As always, something I cannot emphasize enough is, and we preach to everybody we speak to at all forums and all our clients, is to ensure that your organization is treating customers fairly and maintaining those core conduct risk disciplines as you move forward, and making sure those are at the heart of the transition. So going into each one of these kind of components here for just a short moment to kind of elaborate on what we mean is, when we talk about understanding exposure or understanding what this LIBOR transition means from exposure and completeness of scope, we have this across different number of factors. And I think one of the key things is understanding your LIBOR exposure is part one of it. But part two of it is making sure you're consistent with what the PRA format requires of you, or what your internal applications require from an operations side to make sure you're capturing this data and making the correct decisions as you move forward. As a current state of exposure at any given moment in time will drive the direction of your transition program, but also feed directly into your front office and your relationship managers to start taking away and discontinuing those sales in the LIBOR products. From an exposure point of view, one of the key things we always get asked is, how do we ensure we are analysing this data correctly and reporting on it, in the right kind of manner? The critical component of this LIBOR transition program is defining the role of data analytics within your organization. Leveraging your organization's landscape as best as you can and utilizing those tools you have at your advantage will definitely get you part of the way there. But what you really want to know is what you're reporting on, your QIQ exposures, number of facilities, your contract amendments, etc., and how these actually feed into quantifying your decision or evidencing the decision that you're going to make in the near future. One of the things we think here, and it has everything this LIBOR transition has the potential to be, is this PPI for investment banking or the private sector, is how do you make sure you knew at any moment in time where you were, what your RFR product development was, and how you were coming off of your LIBOR products, and how did you cascade that and make sure you were liquid as an organization, but something we'll talk on when we get into the client side is communicating that properly. Something we mentioned earlier as well within exposure is your non-financial exposure. How do you reconcile those risks? How do you make sure that you are developing a comprehensive assessment of conduct risk challenges, compliance risk challenges, interest rate risk challenges, etc. And with that, bringing in these new risk curators and ensuring you have that ongoing collaboration, that ongoing definition of responsibility and requirement. And you don't want this to just be a one-time exercise with these people. You want it to be a continued narrative that allows you to be flexible and robust as we get into the real dark days of probably half to 2021. It's one of the key things when it comes to exposure, is making sure everyone's brought on that journey and everybody knows what's happening. And underlying your exposures in general is how you manage those inherent exposures. And what I mean by that is developing that bank-wide RFR-based transfer pricing and cost of funds modelling. This fundamental shift in cost of funds from LIBORs to an RFR, depending on the jurisdiction, requires a lot of your ALM and balance sheet management teams to develop models which can account not only for term rates, but also for the non-term based RFR calculations as well. And this is something that has to be managed appropriately. Again, not saying this lies wholly within an operations function, but looking at the challenges that are going to come in the near future is something that really needs to be considered. Moving on to the second point here, from a fallbacks point of view, I think this, if I had to keep this at the highest level or the real considerations, is understanding what your hardwired requirement is versus your amendment language. And what I mean by that is, at this stage in the transition, depending if it's a cash product or a derivative product, you'll see there's some differences, and it may be more advisable to offer customer amendment language for, say, a business loan versus hardwired through the ISDA route for any of your ETDs or your OTCs. Again, this is subject to what's happening in your SOFR, so on your calculations and how those are being adopted by the marketplace. But at some point, these will require further development and will require your organization to flex and move towards that as well at the same time. These conventions are far from finalized and complete, but being cognizant of this and being aware that this is going to come, save yourself a lot of pain in the future. A big thing within fallback is, of course, the legal readiness and how you make sure you're engaging with what I like to call counsel, but basically your in-house counsel or your in-house legal, who are bringing you that knowledge of the customer base and the history of existing agreements, and basically really providing that clarity across the business and blending that or factoring in what external counsel's saying. And this is an accurate view of market sentiment, contractual structuring, RFR fallback language considerations, and everything in between. Of course, you can't talk about fallbacks without considering your trigger events, how you prepare for a cessation trigger event, a pre-cessation trigger event, or even an opt-in some instances. So having that understanding of how this all comes together and where you need to be at any given moment of time is really, really important as a hot spot within this market. The client outreach, again, is not strictly from a sales point of view, but more or a relationship manager point of view, but client communication obviously has to be expedited. And there is no indication from member banks that inputs to LIBOR will be published past 2021. So that conduct risk comes into consideration straight again in how you make sure you're accurate and appropriate with your communication across your entire client database. This in turn, of course, requires you to educate and disclose what these challenges are going to be and how it's going to happen, but also how negotiations are going to work, how majority consensus could factor into this, and what this would mean from, say, portfolio management all the way through to individual contract challenge. As cessation date nears, it's probably the case that we'll see increased volatility and or a lack of liquidity in LIBOR reference contracts, and those will have a direct impact on that client negotiation. But equally, that will have a direct impact on your internal organization as well if it's not well understood and that educations and disclosures piece hasn't been cascaded the same way to, your risk team, your legal team, your compliance team, and everyone in between. And the last point within the client side or this communications piece is actually the tracking management. It's one of the things I like to encourage our clients to do and these industry events is to say, how can you attest to what good looks like from an education point of view? Should a regulator or a working group member come and ask you, show me you prepared for this? How do you show that you've done that? How have you tracked this? How have you ensured there's been consistency in what the expectations are across your whole portfolio of products, but also across those jurisdictions in themselves as well? The penultimate point here on legacy is how do you make sure you get the best out of your legacy book migration in line with this new product rollout, in line with all these external factors that are going to come in. The big thing is, I think you've got to consider this first and foremost from a global program approach. At the global level, the IBOR Transition program should be devised using this holistic approach, migrating the legacy book. There will be local and regional adaptations of this global plan, and these should feed back. There should be this narrative and this voice coming back about saying what the specific challenges and roadblocks are to completion. And of course, as we start to really focus on time now ahead of the back end of 2021, is what you don't want to have is situations where timelines get confused or, well, they'll be unaligned, I think, for a period of time, but you want to make sure that your transitioning as wholly and as together as you can. Identifying these discrepancies will alleviate targeting your regions at the same time, but also manage the expectation about what you want from, say, your New York office versus your London office. One of the things we talked about just previously was this legal SME and transitioning. The key consideration when it comes to the legacy book migration is seeking that guidance of your legal function. Legal should hopefully provide, fallback language understandings, that bucketing of customers and facilities, and where they see these conduct risk challenges coming in the near future. What's important to do there is make sure, again, that relationship manager all the way through to settlements and allocations analysts, that message and understanding is the same. This is not an area where you want to have a disjointed view or an unaligned approach to what your book migration looks like. Lastly, within this, before we talk about the regulators, is of course that technology effort and how you migrate your book using this existing technology or new technology stacks are going to come in. Deploying technological solutions, for migration efforts has got pros and cons. I think sometimes it feels like you're trying to block up a dam and put in some plaster to stop a couple of leaks. And if you do focus on a new technology route here, understanding how that interacts and how that integrates from, say, contract discovery all the way through to language amendment and gets captured across your whole organization is imperative to ensure a successful and timely delivery. And of course, lastly, is the regulators. Something we said at the beginning and something we'll keep on saying throughout, and what industry will be aware of throughout, is what is coming out of these working groups, what is coming out of these forums, and what is actually the requirement of you as a firm to transition in an appropriate and timely manner. Aware I've been speaking for the better part of 10 minutes there, so I think now is time to go on, a good time to go on to our fourth poll. But before phoning on that is, if this timeline does hold true, do you feel you'll be able to transition on time? And when I say that, I'm talking about, I think it's the 3rd of January 2022. So with a year and 2 months left to go, how do you feel you're sitting with this transition? And hopefully that'll pop up on the poll screen now. Okay, that's interesting to see. Pretty much the vast majority, 80% of the attendees today, believe that if the timeline holds true, you will be able to transition on time. And that's a great sentiment to see. That's great. That's really good to see that, to understand that. So that makes you feel any more comfort speaking with your peers. That's an excellent result. Sure. Now moving on to my penultimate slide before we go into closing remarks and QA, is that these may sound simple, or these may sound a bit sort of underplayed, but this is where we're at right now, coming the 24th of September 2020. What are these key hotspots to look out for, and where are we going to go? First, and just continuing off of that last point I made there, is regulators. The FCA has held very true to the narrative that LIBOR will end. The Fed has also said similar. It is not going anywhere. And if there was going to be anything that would change this timeline, this would be the first place that we'd hear anything to come from. I think it's at the moment a very safe assumption to work on that this transition will go ahead as planned. There have, of course, been some delays to certain milestones, but by and large, we do not expect these major transition milestones to move much more now because, well, A, they're running out of time going into next year, but also B, any kind of change in direction or narrative now would just cause uncertainty in the market. And I think given everything that's happening at the moment, this would be quite a rogue thing to do, given everything that's happening. So that'll be part one. Part two, the working groups, the FMIs, the CCPs, and every man and his dog in between. We saw back earlier this year, the PIA, the price aligned interest alignment to LCH and CME for ESTR went ahead as planned. And on the 19th of October, this is going to happen for the US dollar. These have been more commonly referred to as your big bang. And this is to really start getting the flow moving through these new RFRs and building up that liquidity. If we were to see any delay here, which again, I don't think is likely given what we're seeing on the floor and seeing what's happening in the market, if there was to be something that happened, this would be an area where you'd see it. As a whole, the CCPs, your LCHs, CMEs, are really working hard to build these new pipes and these new flows to help get these new products out the door. So provided this keeps on happening in the same manner and going the way it should keep going, I can't actually see any issues coming here. But again, after regulators, if anything was to happen within, the working group saying there was a delay, the FMIs or the CCP saying there was a delay, that would reflect itself in your transition plan straight away. The third part is the actual market itself. Now, this is a bit of an interesting one because, again, depending who you speak to, depending what desk you speak to, or anyone in between, some would have the view that the market is getting there. But I think, speaking candidly, the real challenge is always going to lie here within the cash side. ETDs or the listed side itself will figure itself out. It doesn't make sense from an economics point of view to participate in a market where there's no participants in an already illiquid and volatile situation. So your derivatives will work themselves out, and as soon as those conventions come through and the CCP start to flow, that won't be an issue. But cash securities are still presenting the biggest challenge to the market, primarily because any amendment requires unanimous agreement from the parties involved. FRNs, so basically your floating rate notes, usually specify that a rate should be taken from the previous quote, and when that's not available, the interest rate from the previous period. And when you start looking at the nuances and the caveats around what is categorized as a previous period, this fallback could basically mean something can be translated into a fixed rate instrument after the transition. I don't think that's what anybody wants. Nobody wants to see that. And if we are to see the markets advance and to continue building up liquidity, we would assume that this would have to be the narrative or the outcome at the moment. So there's a lot of work to go on there. And I think just building on from that, from part number 4 here, we're now comfortably into Q4 of this year. And if we are, if I was to say to you candidly, where are we now? Where do we need to go? What needs to be done? I think with many milestones action in Q3, more to come in Q4 this year and Q1 next year, we should see that much needed uptick in the new rates. Assuming markets can find some form of semi-normality in the next few months, 6 months, and market volatility reduces, we shouldn't see this significant increase in RFR-linked trading activity. Some industry segments, as we talked about there on the cash side, do have a long way to go with the implementation of stronger fallbacks, clear set of definitions and all that before liquidity can come. But compared to the back end of 2019 and even the early stages of this year, the industry has overcome many hurdles. COVID-19 has surely played its part and challenged some of these interim deadlines, but this has not stopped the industry from moving forward. So these 4 hotspots really are key and really kind of the ones to monitor from your operational readiness and making sure you can go, because it could be the instance or it could be the situation as we move into next year. The requirement comes to change things quickly or steer things quickly, and having a robust approach to this will basically, in monitoring these situations, aligned with everything else we've talked about today, will best position you ahead of the benchmark coming to an end. And with that, I'll now move on to my closing remarks. I think what we've seen and where we're at now, it would be very easy to do nothing and hope for the best. But I think it's fair to say, and it's definitely the case, that this could be costly in terms of revenue, opportunity, relationships, and any other number of problems. I think it's fair to say there is no easy solution, but understanding the impacts to an operational change of this magnitude is a first step. Starting with that determination of products and systems and how they will be impacted will set you off in the right way, if not already there. Building on top of that, developing the plans or a playbook to transition, considering all these different scenarios and outcomes, which gives you that prioritization approach, will just basically get you where you need to go. And the last point here is, if there is a delay, be smart about it. The working groups will tell you what's going to happen, and we just need to make sure that if anything was to happen, you have to be ready to go. With the end of LIBOR rapidly approaching, hopes for extensions and reprieves should not be first choice at the moment. Thank you all for listening. And with the final 13, 14 minutes or so, I'd like to move on to the Q&A side. And please don't hesitate to ask any questions as we go through this right now. But yeah, Sarah, over to you. I think you've been monitoring this. Please come in.
Yes, hi everyone, Sarah Callahan here. Some of you might remember me from our first webinar we did on Workforce of the Future. I'm just going to help Murray a little bit here with the questions that have been coming through, and Murray, give you time to take a sip of water after all of your talking. So we've had some interesting ones come through, so we'll try to get through them in the next 5 to 10 minutes to allow time for Leah to wrap up. For those of you that do have questions that we don't get to, please feel free to post them. Obviously, if it's anonymous, we won't be able to respond directly, but if you do put your name down as you ask the question, we will ensure that we follow up on it, on any questions that you do have. So Murray, I'll start with the first one that came through. So it says, now that the COVID storm has been weathered and globally we are seeing business start to move again, do you expect to see a large increase in RFR-linked products entering the market this year?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Just something we touched upon on the back there, back of that presentation is, the major milestones have been overcome now. There's a couple to come next year, but the reporting from the clearinghouses, the reporting from organisation and industry in general is showing that there is this big uptick in RFRs and ARRs. Probably not where it needs to be, given that there's a lot of time to go and there's a lot of notional outstanding in LIBOR. I think it basically where the easy wins can be done or the low-hanging fruit can be captured, that's being prioritised first and foremost, while working groups, associations and everything in between try to finalise those outstanding conventions as we move, basically as we move into next year. So I'd say definitely we are seeing that uptick and we are seeing it move in the right way.
Great, thanks, Murray. So the next one here says, hi, Murray, thank you. Can you talk a bit, please, on how these new products are performing under these volatile and unpredictable market conditions?
Oof, man, yeah. So I think it's been, apologies for the cliche, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. At the beginning of the year, when COVID first hit and we saw this big release of funding to markets globally, we don't need to go down there because there was ample coverage for this. We saw those IBOR and reference rate spreads widen significantly. Since then, they have contracted. And what this has done, or what that did do, was ask questions about how credit spread adjustments would manifest themselves in the market in the future, how responsive they would be as well. I don't think there's quite enough data to say with confidence, but at the moment, the credit sensitivities are suggesting that they don't perform the best under volatile situations. Similarly, the ISDA fallbacks and spread adjustments have been challenged quite a lot during this period too. And if we are to see instances like this in the future where spread remains elevated, the likelihood of a wider spread adjustment to IBOR cessation is likely to increase. So everything's still new to everybody, and vulnerability is still kind of quite interchangeable. So it will be interesting to see, should this next wave come, how we respond from there. I think that'll get us the best indication. But at the moment, industry does need to learn how to adopt these new rates and the sensitivities that come with them.
Absolutely, yeah, makes complete sense. So I'm just checking what else we have here. So the next one. Hello there. Will there be a delay to the transition? The expected transition?
At the moment, I would say no. I think, speaking honestly, there's a lot to do in a very short period of time. But this does seem to be top of the list for most of the industry and the regulators. So I think my response would be keep liquid, keep focusing on what needs to be done, and make sure when the time comes, you are as best ready to transition as you can. I think there will be an extension and a headache of some sort, but what that looks like now would be purely speculative. So I do not suggest a game of regulatory chicken. You have to be ready as you can be. It's a simple answer.
So we have one here. Are your clients considering using AI, ML, NLP technology to address fallback options when transitioning from IBOR? Or are they relying on external counsel to address all contractual challenges? And it also says, thanks, interesting stuff.
I think, breaking down to a couple parts, I think because of the challenges that have been posed in the last year and where we're at now, legal advice on this, or external legal counsel, has definitely fluctuated. It's gone up and down, as there is a lot of things outstanding from ISDA, the clearing houses, just some of the fundamentals about how products are going to work. We have seen a lot of that external reliance or dependency come down. So I think from that side, the internal legal teams and compliance teams seem to be taking much more of a lead on that, and that's evidence that these participation in these industry events. I think from an AI, ML, or natural language point of view, organizing and analyzing and managing your data is becoming more and more important. And I think had we not only had a year and a couple of months to go to transition, this would be a great opportunity to introduce this technology and start using it. But as we alluded to earlier in this presentation, trying to introduce a duo operating model to understand your exposures, your legacy book migration and contractual update it's probably a bit too much to ask of a combination of functions at the moment. So I think where there was initial appetite for this 2-3 years ago, it's definitely not the cost people want to be spending and focusing their resources on as well. So I'd say that'll probably come in post transition, as we get into that post-benchmark periods.
Sure. There's another one here, actually, I guess, linked to the transition question earlier. What would a green on-track transition plan look like by the end of 2020?
Again, without going into the gory detail of it, I think you can probably categorize this, or you'd want to split this into 3 or 4 parts. The actual program, strategy, and management. So making sure your plans are done, accountables known, everyone who's identified from the front to back has got a say, has got a voice, and is being listened to. The business mobilization, of course, that build of liquidity, getting the products out the door, satisfying that client demand. Part C or part 3 of that would be the administrative mobilization, or that support mobilization, which is the risk management, your models management, and that operational compliance support to ensure that everything's transitioning in the right time and in the right kind of area. And then the big one, which I still don't get a lot of confidence is the actual testing and product readiness for the market, because it's okay to do it piecemeal. But see, if we go from a couple of trades now to hundreds of thousands, that's going to put a lot of pressures and stresses on your organization. So trying to get as much testing and business readiness in as possible would be the thing that overlays all of that, I'd have said. And that would have you in a pretty good position.
Yeah, I think there was quite a lot to cover there. But okay, we have a few more questions, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to go to one more, and we will do our best to follow up on anything else that's come through that we haven't managed to answer. So Murray, one final one for you, and then we will hand back to Leah to wrap up. Is there any development of term rates to replace LIBORs?
Yes and no, depending on the product. So, for example, from a term rate perspective, when you look at the cash products, that's got a lot more work to do. Is working hard on the protocol that needs to be done from a derivative side. That's quite a loaded question. So happy to come back to that one offline and give or respond to that question on an email with all the different caveats and sort of.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks for that, Murray. As I said, we'll follow up on anything else that has come through. So we would just like to thank everybody for joining us today, and thanks to Murray, our SME today, for taking the time to run through that. As Roland mentioned at the start of the call, our next session will be Design Thinking in Operations, which will be hosted on the 15th of October. So we have one of our design thinking specialists from Capco Digital joining us. Amir Jotun is his name. So please do sign up if it's of interest to you. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Leah to wrap up. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yep. The event is actually available for us to sign up on the SIO website as well. Please reach out if you are having troubles getting that information. I'll be more than happy to help. So thank you very much for everyone at Capco putting together this fantastic, well-structured webinar for us today. It's much appreciated. Obviously, I'm the only one able to voice it on the call today, but we will allow everyone to provide feedback on this event separately. So I'll be reaching out, or Raymond from the SIO will be reaching out to our members with a feedback form for this event as well. Again, if you do still have any questions, if you want to maybe get in touch with anyone at Capco, more than happy to help you get that connection going. And if you have any questions, more than happy to do that on your behalf as well to anyone at Capco. So if you want to remain anonymous, you can reach out to myself, or anyone in the SIO network management team will get you in touch. Brilliant. Okay, so I think this was really good, thought-provoking, interesting session. If there are any questions, we'll reach out. And thank you everyone for your time once again. Appreciated.